everyone. My name is Antara Dasgupta, and now I'm a junior professor at RWTH Aachen. I say that only so that we can get in touch if you would like. Right, so I'm presenting on behalf of this fantastic team that I work together with to develop the outlook on scale-relevant hydrological forecasting and modeling. Could we go back for a minute?
Oh.
No worries.
Sure.
So while the tech issues are sorted, there are two QR codes on. On here, the top one is a blog post about how we very inspiringly, in my view, wrote this paper together completely online during COVID. Depressing times, but we had 18 co-authors, some of them quite senior from IWW as well, and we managed this completely online. If you would like to learn about the process, that's up here, and the paper, a QR code is down there. Please feel free to write to us with questions if you have any. And I would like to start by introducing the context of this. So about 2 years ago, we had the joint virtual workshop, which was many abbreviations here, please bear with me, co-organized by ICMWF, CEMS, C3S, HEPEX, and GFP. And when you look at the global views for really, or in my view, perhaps the first time, we had a really global representation and inclusion of a variety of participants who perhaps could not have joined otherwise due to a variety of constraints. So this workshop was organized around 6 themes, focusing on forecasting and uncertainty, co-production and incorporation of local knowledge. And so the risk perceptions is not really outside of what we try to do, but we're not yet quite there. We're working on it. Earth observation data simulation, which is stuff that I do, as most of you know, and then hydrological model development, applications and decision-making. And this really running theme of Earth system modeling was woven across all of these as we move more towards trying to understand the feedbacks across various different Earth processes. And this led us to write this paper where we focused on 2 main questions, one on hydrology, one not so much, but the first main one was, where exactly is this field of global to local hydrological forecasting and modeling headed? And when we look at the statistical analysis of the workshop, there is really a lot to unpack here. So this presentation will be focused a bit on a couple of money slides. This is one of them. Let's talk a bit about what this shows us. So the first thing, not super unexpected, was that the study locations are centered in Europe. This is somewhat expected given the representation of the group that we were in. But what's also encouraging to see is that this is expanding. So North America, for example, is often dominated in hydrological studies, but here we see quite a good representation of study area locations, meaning that we are now implementing or testing our approaches in a variety of new contexts. And this is really awesome. When we look at the spatial scale, though, it's still a bit skewed towards regional level in North and Central America, which is normally when we see these studies, which are just looking at continental United States. And in every other part of the world, we see a nice distribution from local to global scales. So we look at basin scales, right up to catchments and regional levels. And this is also an encouraging finding. What was not as encouraging was that we're still really in the space of the types of studies, we still miss operationalization. So a part of this lies in the continuity of funding, as most of us know. We try something and then it works really well, but we don't really have the money to take it forward. I see lots of nods in the audience, so right. So, but encouragingly, in some spaces. So here we've disaggregated by different applications of hydrological models. And we do have in the light green, you can see operational sort of systems in each one. This is great. But there is still a very large flood bias, which is not the worst thing, but we do need to think about integrating our hydrology, so really thinking about low as well as high flows. And then looking at the temporal scale, we found that long-term or long range to short range are quite well represented. This is good, but we still have a bunch of event-based model setups which cannot really think about this integrated water cycle behavior from low to high flow. So thinking about floods following droughts or the other way around, and this really needs to improve a bit. What we also try to analyze, so a goal of HEPEX as well as the GFP is to represent really a variety of sectors, to bring together practitioners as well as developers. And here we felt that there is still a gap. Despite the conference being quite accessible, we did not have enough representation from the operational sector. Of course, IWW is an operational organization, and they did host this and they did sort of support the conference, but we also would like to get more involved with smaller forecasting agencies, or not necessarily smaller, just more diverse forecasting agencies and practitioners across the world. So this is the second money slide. Here we talk about the key takeaways that we got from reviewing over 1,000 contributions to this excellent virtual workshop, and I will walk you through them. And I feel like this is a good spot for my presentation, following the GlowFast talk and also the talk from the great risk talk from Olivia, just to kind of bring that all together, what we've seen through the last couple of days. So we really do need to operationalize our science, and there are efforts to do that. Whether we think of what Google is doing or what ECMWF is doing, it's really about getting the right information out there. It doesn't so much matter how we do it, we just need to work harder at getting it out there. The second thing is that we need to think about how to communicate forecasts. As scientists, we really love probabilities, right? But this does not work really well with users. So it's worth thinking about, what does probability mean for them, or how could be communicated in a way that's perhaps even if slightly more palatable to our end users, and maybe starting there by asking them, which brings me to my third key takeaway, which is users, putting them at the center of our approaches. I mean, not so much designing a survey around getting responses that we think we need, but rather going out there and just listening a bit on what exactly the needs are. And in this process, through my own personal experience, I find ground or grassroots NGOs are really good stakeholders to take with you, because they have their ear to the ground. It's often easier to get them to boil it down for you. And this could be a way to mediate with the stakeholders and users. And I also want to mention here, users is a heterogeneous term. It's not this picture of farmers somewhere that we have in our heads sometimes. It's also the FBI, as we saw on the slide of Sang-Ho. It's also a scientist who's working on a downstream application, would like access to your forecast. It's really a rich tapestry, which is a bit reduced to the word users, but we really need to think about the different sectors that they're coming from and what their really unique needs are. And then this, talking about shareable data and models, this is mainly to avoid duplication of effort, right? We're all doing something, and it's worth knowing when something doesn't work. I bet all the PhD students in this room would really agree that if they already knew something wouldn't work, they wouldn't spend 6 months of their time trying to implement that. And so it's really important to share negative results as well. If you cannot publish them, put them on GitHub. I mean, just find a way to get it out there. And I think this is happening more and more. And sometimes needs to happen systemically. So now various funders are asking people to do this. And this could probably be the only way to do this going forward, but really to write work packages into our grant applications to fund this. It's not easy to put out reusable data and codes, and therefore it's important to think about how we're going to fund this process. bringing me to our next finding, which was that we need to move towards impact-based forecasts. And we've had some discussions about what that could look like. And impacts, of course, it's important to look at infrastructure. It's important to look at what's going to happen on ground. But it's really, again, a heterogeneous fabric. I think there was a very nice slide in Olivia's talk where she talks about mental health. And these kind of indirect impacts also add costs to flood recovery. And therefore, it's important to recognize that impacts go slightly beyond what we think of as hydrologists. And it's not really bad to talk to other disciplines who are perhaps better equipped than us to think about such impacts, to really get a sense of what that could look like. And that could then help us to better design our anticipatory action and forecast-based financing, which is also really important to ensure faster recovery in socioeconomically weaker communities, which could be quite devastated by the impacts of large flood events and can take really a long time to come back to their original state. And the final kind of finding from all of this is that we need to connect our models, physics-based, AI-based, whatever, but they need to talk to each other. We cannot have independently running met forecasts, independently running flood forecasts, and then be surprised when we're unable to actually simulate the damage that we see on the ground. The feedback processes, as we live in a changing climate, are getting more and more important, and it's becoming quite vital to simulate these feedbacks between the different geophysical processes that are happening on ground. And we are not quite there yet, but this is something that also IWW, so as the largest operational organization in Europe, is working towards slowly, and perhaps we will get there together as a community. And that brings me to my sort of less hydrological focused question, which was how accessible was this digital format, and what does that bring us? So to have more diverse voices at the table is always really helpful. And contrary to most online conferences, we received very glowing positive feedback for this conference. And as you can see here, this was ECMWF's Gather Town. We had a very nice group photo by the lake with the ducks. So it's important to have fun while we do this, because at this time we were dealing with a bunch of Zoom fatigue, and everyone was really, really tired of all of these online meetings which just seemed to burgeon out of nowhere. But it was a good place to have this kind of setup. Gather Town is quite nicely organized, a bit basic, but it does what it's supposed to do, that it helps you feel like you're engaged. And so what was really good was we could keep the technological barriers quite low. You can access Gather Town on any of the updated browsers, which you probably use anyway if you want to do anything else on your laptop. It was over a limited number of days. This really, really helped the Zoom fatigue, and we tested this during the feedback survey, so we know this to be true. It catered to different time zones. So the HEPEX committee, even this year, they really think about how to organize presentations so that our friends in Canada and Australia are not up at 3 a.m. trying to present their research, which we should really be grateful to see, but they're somehow up at 3 doing this. So there's not so many of them, and so it might not be the worst thing to try to schedule their presentations in a time zone that's a bit more palatable to them. Of course, it was really useful to keep attendance free or low cost. It's as most of us know, some of the geophysics conferences in the recent years have gotten out of hand in this space. Any early career you talk to is unable to attend unless they have a very well-funded advisor, and this should not be the case for sure. So accessibility is really something we need to think about as a community. And the way forward, really, it's very brief here, but of course I could talk for a while about this, but we found that when we wrote this paper and reviewed all of these incomplete contributions sometimes, right? Because you show intermediate results at conferences to get some feedback. We found that it's important to consider this right to be forgotten. The internet is an unforgiving place. Once you're on there, it's very hard to get off there, right? Okay, no jokes. So, right, so it's hard. And so if as an early career, you feel like you put out something that could then be damaging in future just because you didn't know what would be the right thing to present or show, or you found a mistake later, a bug in your code or whatever, there should be a possibility to remove this. Therefore, when we wrote the paper, we asked for explicit consent from the authors. We allowed them to update their findings where they wanted to send us their published papers from this so that they don't miss out on the citations. Also, early careers in the room, they will know that this is important while we still continue to rely on age indices. Right, so it was important to do that, but at HEPEX, we allowed them to recall their contributions and remove them from this if they would like, and I found this a very good exercise despite being tedious. The second point, which we are immediately finding also from this year's feedback that we received at the workshop, and perhaps when we have feedback later today, also maybe some of you feel that for here as well, that we need more dedicated emphasis and time for networking. Every time you go to these conferences, you find yourself really most motivated at these coffee side chats. And so how can we really bring that into conferences? So based on this feedback, this year at HEPEX, for instance, we allocated some hours or really a couple of sessions for group discussions on things that HEPEX as a community should be doing for the next decade. For those of you who are not familiar with HEPEX, next year will be the 20th anniversary of the Hydrological Ensemble and Prediction Experiment. And so we will probably try to organize an out-of-plan workshop. Normally it's every 2 years, but maybe we have one next year. So please do try to come and contribute. And so we really found that it's a good exercise to put people in a room, and the kind of messages that came out of it were really, really surprising in some places. And we will try to write it up, if not as a paper, as a blog post, but I will be happy to share it with the GFP when we are ready. And so I would now like to introduce to you my fantastic team. Are some of them here? No, okay. So up until Misha, who some of you know, we are the EC HEPEX community. We try our best to have more and more representation. If you or anyone you know would like to get involved, please get in touch. There will be a QR code on the next slide to show you how. The rest are the organizing committee members who really supported and reviewed our paper internally to help us get the best version of it out there. And I want to leave us at this note. So I talked a lot about things we should be doing, which could feel exhausting, right? I mean, oh no, I'm doing so much and there's still so much to do. But really, we've come a long, long way as a community. So this is a sci-art imagined by Louise Arno, a fellow EC HEPEXer, and she made this as a metaphor for how far we've come from looking into the stars for predicting flooding to now discussing 5-kilometer resolution forecasts on the ground. I mean, it is a long way and we need to celebrate the wins. So on that note, I would like to end with a call to join us at the EC HEPEX Slack. If you're not EC as well, please feel free to join. And for sure, please do look at hepex.org.au. I'm saying it and not putting it on the slide because it's really not that hard. We do have co-chairs from Canada, Australia, Europe, and co-chairs are elected on a rotating basis. So please come, be involved, and hope to see some of you there next year. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation of that. Really nice. It was a really nice workshop, by the way, on Smith. And so congrats on the paper. Are there any questions?
Please.
Yeah, I was really glad to hear you address the issue which we go from science to go to actually producing operational products, which is a huge thing, because scientists aren't in the business of product development. And there's a huge gulf, which we typically call valley depth, between the science and operational products. And there's, I don't know, you mentioned bringing on like NGOs and things in that discussion, but it's still just bringing more end user, particularly science, valley depth is still there. I know that the National Science Foundation has programs where they train scientists how to navigate the valley of depth and understand user needs and translate science into what they actually need to hear. And I don't know what else is going on out there in the rest of the world, but and I feel like that's one thing missing that this one is bringing people who they can help us navigate that gap, which is it's not and that's actually probably the biggest thing that's and you mentioned it, but we didn't dig into it. And you have some more comment on maybe some resources for training scientists in actually evaluating the moon and bringing some of that tradecraft and
Right, thank you for the question. So it's really, the question really focuses on how we can make this connect from science to operations. I do not know of training resources, but what I have learned in my very brief career so far is that there are ways to navigate this. So if you, of course, repeat funding is not guaranteed, right? This is not something that anyone can guarantee, but it is possible to work together with operational agencies, encourage adoption. I think there was a great talk yesterday. I cannot remember now who presented, but Manish presented about if we get the, yes, thank you. So if we get buy-in from the community and from the operational forecasting agencies, and as he very eloquently mentioned, they tested their product for 3 years before they said, okay, now we're going to use it. It's really about engaging with the right kind of end user. So for Europe, that would be ECMWF. So if you engage with ECMWF and if you can demonstrate that there is a better way to do it, they would not be opposed to it. You just have to convince them. And the fact that it's hard to convince them is not the worst thing, right? They want to test the products before they're brought to operations. And this is not the worst thing. We were listening from Google yesterday that they really want to test their products before they would like to release them. And this is not the worst thing. It's just that we need to keep at it. It's not a one-day activity. It could take 3 years very much. And we need to be a bit patient with that. But I think trust and adoption are the main ways in which we could ensure a bit of continuity. Thank you.
Thanks.